On a humid morning in June 2003, in the small town of Scottsboro, Alabama, a mother named Jennifer Hayes woke to discover her 4-year-old daughter Melissa was not in her bed. The child's pink bedroom door stood open, the sheets pulled back neatly as if she had simply gotten up to use the bathroom. But Melissa was nowhere in the house, not in the kitchen, not watching cartoons in the living room, not playing in the backyard where her swing moved slightly in the breeze, though no one pushed it. Within hours, what began as a frantic search would become something else entirely, something that would haunt this community for nearly 2 decades. The question that morning was simple: where was Melissa Hayes? The question that would follow, whispered in diners and grocery store aisles for years to come, was far more troubling. Who was responsible? The town of Scottsboro sits in the northeastern corner of Alabama, nestled against the Tennessee River where it widens into Lake Guntersville. Population in 2003 hovered around 14,000. The kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked at night, where children rode bicycles without helmets down quiet streets lined with dogwoods and magnolias. Main Street featured a courthouse built in 1868, its white columns visible from nearly every approach to downtown. There were 2 traffic lights, 3 churches within walking distance of each other, a diner that served breakfast all day and knew everyone's usual order. The Hayes family lived on Maple Grove Road, a winding 2-lane stretch about 4 miles outside the town center. Their home was a modest ranch-style house painted pale yellow, with dark green shutters and a gravel driveway that crunched under tires. Behind the house, a wooden privacy fence enclosed a small backyard where Melissa's swing set stood beside a sandbox her father had built the previous summer. The swing was red plastic. The chain squeaked when she pumped her legs, a sound Jennifer had grown so accustomed to she barely noticed it anymore. Jennifer Hayes was 28 years old that summer. She worked part-time as a receptionist at a dental office in town, her shifts rotating so she could be home with Melissa as much as possible. She had auburn hair she wore pulled back in a ponytail most days, green eyes that crinkled when she smiled, a quiet laugh. Those who knew her described her as careful, protective, the kind of mother who checked on her daughter 3 times before going to bed herself. She had been married to Robert Hayes for 6 years. Robert was 31, a mechanic at Johnson's Auto Repair on Highway 72. He was a large man, 6'2", with thick forearms and permanent grease under his fingernails no amount of scrubbing could remove. He spoke in short sentences, kept mostly to himself, spent his evenings in the garage working on an old Chevrolet Camaro he had been restoring since before Melissa was born. Melissa was their only child, 4 years old that June, with blonde hair that fell in ringlets past her shoulders and her mother's green eyes. She loved Dora the Explorer, insisted on wearing her purple rain boots even when it was not raining, carried a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hops everywhere she went. She attended preschool 3 mornings a week at First Baptist Church. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, would later tell investigators that Melissa was quiet but engaged, that she colored inside the lines and always said please and thank you. The morning of June 12, 2003 began like any other. Jennifer woke at 6:30 to the sound of her alarm. She heard Robert in the shower, the pipes groaning as they always did. She made coffee in the kitchen, standing by the window that overlooked the backyard. The sky was already pale blue, promising heat. Humidity hung in the air like a wet towel. She could hear cicadas beginning their daily chorus. She poured Robert's coffee into his travel mug, the one with the Ford logo on it. He came downstairs at 6:50, dressed in his gray work uniform with his name stitched over the pocket. He drank the coffee standing at the counter. He said he would be working late that evening, a transmission job that needed finishing. He kissed Jennifer on the forehead. He left at 7:05. She heard his truck, a blue Ford F-150, start in the driveway, heard the gravel crunch as he backed out. Jennifer went upstairs at 7:15 to wake Melissa. Thursday was not a preschool day, so they had no morning rush. She planned to take Melissa to the library later, then maybe to the park if it was not too hot. She pushed open Melissa's bedroom door, the one decorated with stickers of butterflies and flowers. The bed was empty. The sheets were pulled back neatly, almost too neatly. Mr. Hops lay on the pillow. Melissa never went anywhere without Mr. Hops. Clear's throat. Jennifer checked the bathroom. She checked the other bedroom upstairs, the guest room they used for storage. She went downstairs calling Melissa's name. She checked the living room, behind the couch where Melissa sometimes played. She checked the kitchen, under the table. She opened the back door and stepped into the yard. The swing hung still. The sandbox was empty. She walked the perimeter of the fence, calling. No answer came. She went back inside and called Robert's work number. The phone rang 4 times before someone picked up. A voice she recognized as Dale, one of the other mechanics, said Robert had not arrived yet. She hung up. She called Robert's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. At 7:43, Jennifer Hayes called 911. The dispatcher who answered, a woman named Carol Hendricks who had worked for the county for 12 years, would later describe Jennifer's voice as shaking but controlled. Jennifer said her daughter was missing. She said she had checked the entire house and the yard. She said the back door had been unlocked, but she could not remember if she had checked it before going to bed the night before. Carol told her to stay on the line. She dispatched 2 deputies immediately. Deputy Mark Carlson arrived at 7:52. Deputy Sarah Chen arrived at 7:55. They began a systematic search of the house, the yard, the surrounding property. They asked Jennifer when she had last seen Melissa. Jennifer said the night before, around 8:30, when she put Melissa to bed. She said she had read her a story, Good Night Moon, the same book they read every night. She said Melissa had been tired, had not argued about bedtime. She said she had kissed her good night and closed the door halfway, the way Melissa liked it. She said she had checked on her around 10 o'clock before she herself went to bed, and Melissa was sleeping peacefully. Deputy Carlson asked if all the doors had been locked the night before. Jennifer said she thought so but could not be certain. She said Robert usually checked the doors before bed, but he had been in the garage working late. She said she had fallen asleep before he came upstairs. Deputy Chen examined the back door, the one leading to the yard. The lock was a simple turn bolt, old and worn. There were no signs of forced entry, no scratches on the door frame, no splintered wood. The door opened and closed smoothly, quietly. By 8:15, Sheriff Tom Bradley arrived. He was 56 years old, a man who had worked in law enforcement in Jackson County for 29 years. He had a weathered face and gray hair cut military short. He stood in the Hayes' living room and asked Jennifer to walk him through the timeline again. She did. Her hands shook as she spoke. She kept glancing at the stairs, as if expecting Melissa to appear. Sheriff Bradley called for additional units. He called for search and rescue. He called the Alabama Bureau of Investigation. By 8:45, the house on Maple Grove Road was the center of a rapidly expanding operation. Robert Hayes arrived at the house at 9:07. His truck turned into the driveway fast, spraying gravel. He ran inside, his face red, his eyes wide. He asked where Melissa was. Jennifer collapsed against him, crying. He held her for a moment, then pulled away and started searching the house himself, moving quickly from room to room, opening closets, looking under beds, calling Melissa's name loud enough that deputies outside could hear him. Deputy Carlson approached Robert and asked him to step outside. They stood on the front lawn near Robert's truck. Carlson asked Robert where he had been that morning. Robert said he had been at work. Carlson asked what time he arrived. Robert said around 7:30. Carlson asked if anyone could verify that. Robert said probably, but he had been alone in the bay for the first hour, working on the transmission job. The search expanded rapidly. By 10 o'clock, volunteers from the community began arriving. The fire department came with 6 men and a tracking dog. The dog, a German shepherd named Rex, was given one of Melissa's shirts to smell. Rex circled the backyard 3 times, then sat down near the back gate. The handler, a man named Curtis Webb who had trained search dogs for 15 years, said this usually meant the trail ended at that point, suggesting the child had been carried from there or placed in a vehicle. The back gate led to a narrow dirt road that connected to Maple Grove Road about a quarter-mile down. Curtis walked that path with Rex. The dog showed no interest. By noon, 30 volunteers were walking grid patterns through the woods behind the Hayes property. The woods stretched for miles, dense with oak and pine and thick underbrush. The temperature had climbed to 87 degrees. Humidity made the air feel even hotter. Volunteers carried bottles of water, wore baseball caps against the sun. They called Melissa's name every few steps. Their voices echoed through the trees, overlapping, creating a strange chorus that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Jennifer sat on the front porch, her mother beside her. Her mother, Patricia Moore, had arrived from Birmingham around 11 o'clock, driving the 3 hours after Jennifer called her in tears. Patricia held Jennifer's hand and did not speak. Robert stood in the driveway, talking to Sheriff Bradley. Those who observed the conversation later, including Deputy Chen who stood nearby taking notes, said Robert seemed agitated, kept running his hands through his hair, kept asking what they were doing, why they had not found her yet. Sheriff Bradley spoke calmly, told Robert they were doing everything possible. The local news arrived at 1:30. A van from WAFF 48 News out of Huntsville parked on the road. A reporter named Amanda Keller set up with a cameraman and began filming. She interviewed Sheriff Bradley, who stood in the Hayes' driveway and gave a brief statement. He said they were searching for 4-year-old Melissa Hayes, who had been discovered missing that morning. He said they had multiple teams searching the area. He said anyone with information should call the Jackson County Sheriff's Department immediately. Amanda Keller also approached Jennifer, who was still sitting on the porch. Patricia waved her away. The camera captured Jennifer's face briefly, pale and drawn, before the cameraman turned away. By 3 o'clock, the Scottsboro community had mobilized entirely. The First Baptist Church set up a command center in their fellowship hall, providing food and water for searchers. Pastor William Graves, who had baptized Melissa the previous Easter, led a prayer vigil at 4 o'clock that drew more than 100 people. They stood in a circle in the church parking lot holding hands, their heads bowed. Some wept openly. Others stood in silence, their faces grim. The FBI arrived at 4:30. 2 agents, Special Agent Michael Torres and Special Agent Linda Vance, both from the Birmingham field office. They set up in the living room of the Hayes home and began conducting formal interviews. They spoke with Jennifer first, asking her to recount every detail of the previous evening and that morning. They asked about Melissa's routines, her personality, whether she would have gone with a stranger. Jennifer said no. Melissa was shy around people she did not know. They asked about family members, friends, anyone who had access to the house. Jennifer named her mother, her sister who lived in Nashville, Robert's brother who lived in Huntsville. They asked about Robert's demeanor recently, whether anything had been unusual. Jennifer hesitated before answering. She said Robert had been stressed about money, about bills, but nothing out of the ordinary. Special Agent Torres interviewed Robert in the kitchen. He asked Robert to account for his whereabouts from the previous evening until that morning. Robert said he had come home from work around 6 o'clock. He said he had eaten dinner with Jennifer and Melissa, spaghetti with garlic bread. He said he had watched television with them for a while, some cartoon Melissa wanted to see. He said he had gone out to the garage around 7:30 to work on the Camaro. He said he had worked until around 11:30, then come inside and gone to bed. Agent Torres asked if Jennifer was already asleep when he came upstairs. Robert said yes. Agent Torres asked if he had checked on Melissa before going to bed. Robert said he had looked in on her, seen she was sleeping. Agent Torres asked if all the doors were locked. Robert said he thought so, but he could not remember specifically checking the back door. Agent Torres asked Robert about his morning. Robert said he had left for work around 7:05. He said he had stopped at a gas station, the Shell on Highway 72, to fill his truck and buy a coffee. He said he arrived at work around 7:30. Agent Torres asked if anyone saw him arrive. Robert said he did not know, maybe. He said he had been alone in the bay working on the transmission. He said Dale had come in around 8:30 and they had talked briefly. He said he got the call from Jennifer around 8:45 and left immediately. Agent Torres asked if he could examine Robert's truck. Robert said yes. They walked outside together. Agent Torres and a forensic technician who had arrived with the FBI agents spent 20 minutes examining the truck. They checked the bed, looked under the seats, opened the toolbox mounted behind the cab. They found nothing unusual. Work tools, empty fast food bags, a jacket. The odometer reading showed Robert had driven approximately 14.6 miles that morning, consistent with the distance from his home to the gas station to his workplace. As the sun began to set on June 12, 2003, Melissa Hayes had been missing for more than 12 hours. The search continued into the night. Volunteers carrying flashlights through the woods, their beams cutting through the darkness like scattered stars. Helicopters from the Alabama State Police flew overhead with thermal imaging equipment, searching for any heat signature. They found deer, raccoons, one coyote. No sign of a small child. Jennifer and Patricia sat in the living room long after midnight, not speaking, just waiting. Robert paced. He would sit for a moment, then stand and walk to the window, then sit again. Deputy Chen remained at the house, monitoring communications with the search teams. At 2 in the morning, Sheriff Bradley called off the active search until sunrise. He told the remaining volunteers to go home, get some rest, return at first light. Most did. Some refused to leave, setting up in the church parking lot, sleeping in their cars. Over the following days, the search for Melissa Hayes became one of the largest operations Jackson County had ever seen. More than 300 volunteers participated at various points. They searched the woods, the riverbank, abandoned buildings, wells, culverts, anywhere a small child might be hidden or might have wandered. Bloodhounds were brought in from Tennessee. A dive team searched a pond half a mile from the Hayes property. They found nothing. Investigators began piecing together a more detailed timeline. They interviewed neighbors on Maple Grove Road. Mrs. Edith Crane, who lived in the house closest to the Hayes family about 200 yards away, said she had not seen or heard anything unusual the night of June 11th or the morning of June 12th. She said she had been watching television that evening and had gone to bed around 10 o'clock. She said she was a light sleeper and would have noticed a car passing, but she heard nothing. Mr. Raymond Foster, who lived on the opposite side of the Hayes property, said he had been working night shift at the paper mill and had not been home. They reviewed security footage from the Shell station, where Robert said he stopped that morning. The footage confirmed Robert's truck at the pumps at 7:14. Robert could be seen getting out, filling the tank, going inside. He emerged 4 minutes later with a coffee cup, got back in his truck, drove away. The timestamp on his receipt matched, 7:18. They interviewed Robert's coworkers at Johnson's Auto Repair. Dale Patterson said he arrived at work around 8:30, and Robert was already there, working on a transmission. Dale said Robert seemed normal, did not mention anything about Melissa or any problems at home. The owner, Bill Johnson, said Robert had clocked in at 7:29 using the time clock near the office. The time clock record confirmed this. But inconsistencies began to emerge, small at first, then more troubling. Deputies noted that Robert's demeanor seemed oddly controlled for a father whose child was missing. While Jennifer could barely speak without crying, Robert appeared composed, even cold at times. During one interview, when Agent Vance asked him to describe Melissa's personality, he gave short, almost mechanical answers. She likes cartoons. She plays with her stuffed rabbit. She is a good kid. Agent Vance noted in her report that his responses lacked the emotional detail she would expect from a parent. Investigators also noted discrepancies in Robert's account of the previous evening. Jennifer said Robert had been in the garage from around 7:30 until past 11. But when Agent Torres examined the Camaro in the garage, he found that little actual work appeared to have been done. The transmission Robert claimed to be rebuilding was in the same state as it had been weeks earlier. According to photographs Robert himself had taken to document his progress. The tools on the workbench were clean, organized. There were no fresh grease stains, no indication of recent work. On June 15th, 3 days after Melissa disappeared, Special Agent Torres obtained permission to examine the Hayes family's phone records. Jennifer's cell phone showed no unusual activity. Robert's cell phone showed something unexpected. On the night of June 11th, between 9:45 and 10:30, Robert had made 3 calls to a number registered to a woman named Crystal Martinez. Crystal lived in Huntsville, about 30 miles from Scottsboro. When agents interviewed her, she confirmed she knew Robert. She said they had met at a bar several months earlier. She said they had been seeing each other occasionally. She said Robert had told her he was separated from his wife. On the night of June 11th, she said, Robert had called to cancel plans they had made for the following week. She said he sounded distracted, said something had come up. She said the calls lasted a total of about 20 minutes. When confronted with this information, Robert admitted to the affair. He sat in the interview room at the sheriff's department, Agent Torres and Agent Vance across from him, and said yes, he had been seeing Crystal, but it had nothing to do with Melissa. He said he had been planning to leave Jennifer, but he would never hurt his daughter. He said he loved Melissa. Agent Torres asked why he had been on the phone with Crystal if he was supposedly working in the garage. Robert said he took breaks, made calls. He said Jennifer was inside, would not have known. Polygraph examinations were administered. Jennifer passed without significant deception indicated. Robert's results were inconclusive. The examiner noted elevated stress responses to questions about the night of June 11th and the morning of June 12th. But inconclusive results are not admissions of guilt. They simply mean the test could not definitively determine truthfulness. As June turned to July, the investigation began to slow. There were no credible leads. No witnesses had seen Melissa. No physical evidence had been found. The woods had been searched thoroughly, then searched again. The river had been dragged. Every sex offender within a 50-mile radius had been interviewed and cleared. Sheriff Bradley held a press conference on July 3rd and admitted they had reached a standstill. He said the case remained open, that they would continue to follow any leads, but he had no new information to share. He appealed to the public one more time. If anyone knew anything, saw anything, they should come forward. The media coverage gradually faded. By mid-July, the news vans were gone. The volunteer searches had stopped. The command center at First Baptist Church was dismantled. Life in Scottsboro returned to something resembling normal, though the absence of Melissa Hayes hung over the town like a shadow. Her picture remained on telephone poles and storefront windows. Missing posters faded in the sun, but no one took them down. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the slow creep of suspicion against your own will, you understand what Jennifer Hayes experienced in the months that followed. She stayed in the house on Maple Grove Road through the summer, though her mother urged her to move back to Birmingham. She returned to work at the dental office, though she could barely concentrate. Patients would come in and offer their condolences, their prayers, their hopes that Melissa would be found. Jennifer would smile and thank them and feel nothing. Robert continued working at the auto shop. He came home every evening, ate dinner, sometimes in silence, sometimes attempting conversation that went nowhere. They slept in the same bed but did not touch. Jennifer would lie awake listening to him breathe and wonder what he knew, what he had done, if the man beside her was a stranger. She had no proof, only a feeling that grew stronger each day, a certainty that settled in her stomach like a stone. In September 2003, Jennifer moved out. She packed her clothes, some photographs, a few items from Melissa's room including Mr. Hopp's, and drove to her mother's house in Birmingham. She filed for separation in October. Robert did not contest it. They spoke only through lawyers after that. Robert remained in the house on Maple Grove Road. Those who saw him around town said he looked thinner, older. He stopped working on the Camaro. The garage stood empty. The case remained officially open but inactive. Sheriff Bradley retired in 2006, and the new sheriff, Kenneth Moore, inherited dozens of unsolved cases including Melissa Hayes. The file sat in a cabinet, periodically reviewed but never advancing. Years passed. 2004 became 2005 became 2010. Jennifer remarried in 2008 to a man named David Carter, a teacher she met through her church in Birmingham. They moved to a quiet suburb, bought a small house with a garden. Jennifer rarely spoke about Melissa, though David knew the story. Some wounds do not heal, they simply scar over. Clear's throat. In the autumn of 2012, 9 years after Melissa disappeared, Jennifer received a phone call. The number was unfamiliar. A woman's voice identified herself as Detective Sarah Martinez with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, formerly Deputy Chen. She said she needed to speak with Jennifer about Melissa's case. Could Jennifer come to Scottsboro? Jennifer felt her breath catch. She said yes. She drove the 3 hours the next day, David beside her, his hand on hers the entire way. Detective Martinez met them at the sheriff's department. She was older now, her dark hair shorter, a few gray strands visible. She led them to an interview room and closed the door. She said they had received new information about Melissa's case. She said she could not share all the details yet, but they were reopening the investigation. She asked Jennifer if Robert had ever said anything, done anything, that seemed suspicious in the years since the separation. Jennifer said they had not spoken in years, that she had no contact with him. Detective Martinez nodded. She said they would be in touch. The meeting lasted 15 minutes. What Detective Martinez did not tell Jennifer that day was that Robert Hayes's brother, Michael Hayes, had come forward 3 weeks earlier. Michael lived in Huntsville, worked as an electrician, had distanced himself from Robert after Melissa disappeared. On October 2nd, 2012, Michael walked into the sheriff's department and asked to speak with someone about the Melissa Hayes case. He was shown to Detective Martinez's office. He sat down and said he had information he should have shared years ago, but had been too frightened to come forward. He said Robert had called him on the evening of June 11, 2003, around 10 o'clock. He said Robert sounded strange, panicked. Robert had said something terrible had happened. He had said Melissa was dead. He had said it was an accident. Michael told Detective Martinez that Robert begged him to help, to come to the house, but Michael refused. He said he told Robert to call the police, to call an ambulance. He said Robert hung up. Michael said he tried calling back several times, but Robert did not answer. The next day, when he heard Melissa was missing, he was terrified. He did not know what to do. He was afraid if he came forward, he would be considered an accomplice. He said he had lived with the guilt for 9 years and could not carry it anymore. Detective Martinez immediately contacted the Alabama Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Torres, now retired, was consulted. The case was assigned to Special Agent Kevin Wright. On October 15, 2012, armed with Michael's statement and a renewed warrant, investigators executed a search of the property on Maple Grove Road. Robert still lived there, alone. He answered the door at 6 in the morning when deputies knocked. He was informed of the search warrant. He stood in his living room and watched as forensic teams went through his house. The garage was the focus. Investigators used luminol to detect blood traces. In the corner of the garage near the workbench, luminol revealed a pattern consistent with blood spatter, though it had been cleaned thoroughly. Samples were collected. DNA testing would take weeks. They also examined the concrete floor more carefully with ground-penetrating radar, looking for any anomalies. They found nothing conclusive. On October 23, 2012, Robert Hayes was arrested. The charges were filed as murder in the second degree and abuse of a corpse. The arrest occurred at his workplace, Johnson's Auto Repair, at 9:30 in the morning. Two deputies approached Robert while he was under a vehicle on a lift. They asked him to come out. They read him his rights. They placed him in handcuffs. Dale Patterson, still working at the shop, watched from across the bay. He later told reporters that Robert said nothing, did not resist, simply looked at the ground as they led him away. The arrest made national news. CNN covered it. Nancy Grace devoted a segment to it. The town of Scottsboro was shocked. Many had moved on, assumed Melissa had been taken by a stranger, that she might still be alive somewhere. The revelation that her own father was being charged with her murder was almost too much to process. Opinion in town split immediately. Some had always suspected Robert. They pointed to his affair, his strange behavior, the inconsistencies in his story. Others defended him. They said he had suffered enough, that the evidence was circumstantial, that Michael's statement meant nothing without a body. Jennifer heard about the arrest from Detective Martinez, who called her before the news went public. Jennifer sat at her kitchen table in Birmingham and wept. David held her. She said she had known. She had always known, but having it confirmed was different. She said she felt relief and rage in equal measure. She said she wanted to see Robert to ask him why, but she knew she never would. The trial began in March 2013. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Harold Stevens, a veteran prosecutor who had handled murder cases for 26 years. The defense was provided by court-appointed attorney Richard Lang, a capable lawyer who nonetheless faced an uphill battle. The trial was held in the Jackson County Courthouse, the same building with white columns that had stood since 1868. The courtroom was packed every day. Jennifer attended every session, sitting in the second row behind the prosecution's table. Robert sat beside his attorney, wearing a dark suit, his face expressionless. The prosecution's case rested heavily on Michael Hayes' testimony. Michael took the stand on the third day of trial. He was sworn in, sat down, and recounted the phone call from Robert on the night of June 11, 2003. He said Robert's exact words were, "Mike, something terrible happened. Melissa is dead. I didn't mean to, you have to help me." The courtroom was silent. Michael's voice broke as he spoke. He said he had nightmares about that call for 9 years. He said he should have acted differently, but fear paralyzed him. The defense challenged Michael's credibility. Richard Lang pointed out that Michael had waited 9 years to come forward. He suggested Michael might have fabricated the story for attention or to hurt his brother, with whom he had been estranged. Michael insisted the call happened. He said he had no reason to lie now. The jury listened intently. The prosecution also presented forensic evidence. A forensic specialist testified about the luminol results in the garage, explaining that the pattern was consistent with blood spatter that had been vigorously cleaned. The DNA results from the samples were inconclusive due to degradation over 9 years, but the specialist said the blood was human and consistent with type O positive, Melissa's blood type. The defense pointed out that type O positive is the most common blood type, shared by approximately 37% of the population. The forensic specialist acknowledged this, but maintained the pattern and location were significant. The prosecution presented Robert's phone records, showing the calls to Crystal Martinez, establishing that Robert had lied about working uninterrupted in the garage. They presented testimony from Crystal herself, who described Robert as secretive and evasive. They presented timeline inconsistencies, the lack of work done on the Camaro, the oddly clean tools. They built a circumstantial case, piece by piece, suggesting that something happened in that garage on the night of June 11th, something Robert had hidden. The defense called character witnesses. Dale Patterson testified that Robert was a good worker, reliable, honest. Pastor Graves testified that Robert had attended church regularly with his family, that he seemed devoted to Melissa. Robert's attorney argued that the prosecution had no body, no murder weapon, no direct evidence. He argued that Michael's testimony was unreliable, that the forensic evidence was inconclusive, that reasonable doubt existed. Robert Hayes did not testify. His attorney advised against it. The jury would not hear Robert's voice, would not hear him deny or explain. Jennifer watched him throughout the trial, searching his face for something, any sign of remorse or truth. She saw nothing. He sat still, his hands folded on the table, his eyes forward. Closing arguments were delivered on March 19, 2013. District Attorney Stephen stood before the jury and spoke for 43 minutes. He walked them through the evidence methodically. He said Robert Hayes had been living a double life, planning to leave his family, burdened by a child who complicated those plans. He said something happened that night in the garage, whether intentional or accidental, and Robert made a choice. He chose to hide it. He chose to pretend Melissa had vanished. He chose to let Jennifer suffer for 9 years, wondering if her daughter was alive, if she would ever see her again. Stephen said, Melissa Hayes deserved better. Jennifer Hayes deserved better. This community deserved better. The defendant made his choice 9 years ago. Now you must make yours. Richard Lang delivered his closing argument immediately after. He reminded the jury that the burden of proof rested with the prosecution. He said they had heard a lot of suspicion, but very little evidence. He said Michael Hayes was not credible. He said the blood evidence was inconclusive. He said the prosecution wanted the jury to convict based on their emotions, their sympathy for Jennifer, their need for closure. He said that was not justice. He said, you cannot convict a man of murder without a body, without a weapon, without proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That is our system. That is the law. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They requested to review Michael Hayes' testimony twice. They requested to review the forensic evidence. On March 21, 2013, at 3:47 in the afternoon, they returned with a verdict. The courtroom was silent as the foreman stood. Judge Patricia Wilson asked if the jury had reached a verdict. The foreman said they had, guilty on both counts, murder in the 2nd degree, abuse of a corpse. Jennifer gasped. She covered her mouth with her hand. David put his arm around her. Robert Hayes showed no reaction. He stared straight ahead as the verdict was read. Judge Wilson thanked the jury and scheduled sentencing for April 5th. Robert was led from the courtroom in handcuffs. Jennifer watched him go. She would never see him again. Sentencing occurred 2 weeks later. Judge Wilson imposed the maximum sentence allowed under Alabama law for 2nd-degree murder, life imprisonment. She also added an additional 5 years for abuse of a corpse, to be served consecutively. She said that, while the court understood that no amount of time could bring Melissa Hayes back or heal the wounds inflicted, justice required accountability. Robert Hayes was transported to Donaldson Correctional Facility in Bessemer, Alabama. He did not speak at sentencing. He did not apologize. He maintained his silence. Melissa Hayes' body has never been found. Investigators continued searching the property on Maple Grove Road for months after the trial, using cadaver dogs and excavation equipment. They searched the woods again, the riverbank, every location Robert had been known to frequent. They found nothing. The prevailing theory is that Robert disposed of Melissa's body somewhere remote, possibly in the Tennessee River, or in one of the many forested areas surrounding Scottsboro. Without his cooperation, which he never provided, the location remains unknown. Jennifer moved forward as best she could. She and David had a daughter in 2015 named Emily. Jennifer told Emily about Melissa when she was old enough to understand, showed her photographs, kept Melissa's memory alive. Jennifer occasionally returns to Scottsboro, visits the spot on Maple Grove Road where her daughter disappeared, leaves flowers by the mailbox where a missing poster once hung. The house itself was sold in 2014, renovated by new owners who knew nothing of its history. The case of Melissa Hayes remains a reminder of how justice can be delayed but not always denied, how truth has a way of surfacing even after years of silence. Those who followed the case, who watched the trial, who knew the family, speak of it still in hushed tones. They speak of a little girl who loved cartoons and purple boots, who carried a stuffed rabbit everywhere, whose laughter once filled a house on Maple Grove Road. They speak of a mother who never stopped searching, who lived with doubt and grief for nearly a decade before finally hearing the words guilty. They speak of a town that was shaken to its core when one of their own was arrested for the unthinkable. For those who have ever waited for answers that seem like they will never come, for those who have carried the weight of not knowing, the resolution of Melissa Hayes' case offers a complicated solace. Justice was served in a courtroom, but Melissa is still gone. A man sits in prison, but a little girl is still missing. Some endings are not truly endings, only shifts in how we carry the pain. If this story mattered to you, if you believe that Melissa's life deserved to be remembered and her case deserved to be told, subscribe and hit the bell. Share this episode. Talk about it with someone who needs to hear it. Because somewhere out there, in another small town, on another quiet road, there might be another child whose story has not yet been told, another family still waiting for the truth. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.